James stepped through his front door, the afternoon sunlight slanting behind him. The break had done him the world of good, but it was sure nice to be home. His first thought was of Max, his German shepherd. Strange. No clicking of nails on hardwood, no excited barking, no furry body hurtling toward him. "Max, buddy, where are you?" His voice echoed through the silent house. Something wasn't right. The air felt different, disturbed. James dropped his bags and moved cautiously down the hallway, his old military instincts kicking in. "Max?" A faint whimper from upstairs. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by concern. When he reached the living room entrance, he froze. Dark, rust-colored splatters marked the cream walls. Blood, so much blood! "Max!" His heart hammered against his ribs. The sound of movement upstairs, then the slow descent of paws on steps. Max appeared, tail tucked, ears flattened, shaking violently. "Oh, thank God," James whispered, kneeling. Max approached cautiously, eyes wide with fear. No visible injuries, but something had terrified his brave companion. James gently nudged the living room door wider with his foot. The sight that greeted him stole his breath away. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. James Wilson hadn't always been alone. 6 years ago, he had a different life. A wife named Sarah, a promising career in academia, and plans for a family. That changed on a rainy October evening when Sarah's car hydroplaned on the interstate. By the time James reached the hospital, she was gone. The history professor returned to an empty house that no longer felt like home, his grief complicated by the PTSD he'd carried since his Marine days in Afghanistan. For months, he merely existed, teaching his Civil War courses at Ridgewood College by day and battling nightmares by night. It was Emily Parker who finally intervened. The local veterinarian had been friends with James and Sarah since they all moved to Ridgewood Park, a picturesque Virginia town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. "You need something to care for her," she told him one evening after practically forcing her way into his neglected home. The following weekend, she drove him to a shelter where a German shepherd cowered in the corner of his kennel, suspicious eyes tracking their movements. "His name is Max," the shelter worker explained. "Military working dog. Handler died overseas. Max came back with anxiety issues. Doesn't trust easily." Something in those words resonated with James. 2 broken soldiers, he thought. Maybe they could heal together. The first weeks were difficult. Max kept his distance, watching James from across rooms. He startled at loud noises, refused to sleep soundly. James recognized the hypervigilance. He suffered from it himself. Gradually, they established routines. Morning walks along forest trails, evening reading sessions where James would grade papers while Max lay nearby, slowly inching closer each night. The first time Max rested his head on James's foot, the professor wept silently. The first emotional release since Sarah's funeral. By the 3-year mark, they were inseparable. Max's nightmares had largely subsided, though occasionally James would wake to find the dog standing alert beside his bed as if standing guard. James's own episodes became less frequent. His colleagues noticed the change. The professor smiled more, engaged in faculty gatherings, occasionally joined them for dinner. Emily observed the transformation with quiet satisfaction, her routine check-ins evolving into movie nights and weekend hikes, the 3 of them forming an unconventional family unit, bound by mutual healing and unspoken understanding. James's modest cottage on Cedar Lane became a sanctuary again. The walls that once echoed with his grief now witnessed recovery. Max's excited greeting when James returned from campus, their companionable silence as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over Ridgewood's tallest oaks. For 5 years their bond deepened, each the guardian of the other's fragile peace. The spring semester had been particularly grueling for James. Budget cuts meant larger class sizes, and the department chair had volunteered him to mentor 3 graduate students working on their dissertations. By May, dark circles had formed permanent residences beneath his eyes, and his colleagues had stopped asking if he was okay, the answer evident in his slumped shoulders and distracted gaze. Even Max seemed to sense his exhaustion, bringing toys to his desk less frequently, content instead to lie quietly nearby as James worked late into the evenings. "You need a break," Emily declared one Sunday afternoon in early June. She had stopped by with lunch after noticing James had missed their usual Saturday morning hike. Now she stood in his kitchen, arms crossed, while he half-heartedly attempted to organize a stack of final papers. "I'm serious, James. When was the last time you took an actual vacation?" James ran a hand through his graying hair. "I don't know. Before Sarah, I guess." The words hung in the air between them, acknowledgment of a life divided into before and after. "That's what I thought," Emily said softly. She pulled a chair beside him and opened her laptop. "Look at this. Mountain cabin, private lake access, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just you, books, and nature for a week." She turned the screen toward him, revealing photos of a rustic wooden cabin surrounded by towering pines. "It looks peaceful," James admitted, feeling the first stirrings of longing. "But I can't leave Max. You know how he gets with strangers." Emily rolled her eyes. "I'm not a stranger, you stubborn man. Max and I are good friends, in case you haven't noticed. I'll stay here with him, keep his routine exactly the same." "I don't know, Em. It's a lot to ask." "It's not asking when I'm offering," she interrupted. "Besides, this place doesn't allow pets. And you need this, James. Your students need you to come back refreshed next semester." When he still hesitated, she added, "Max will be fine. He knows me, trusts me." The German shepherd, hearing his name, padded into the kitchen and nudged Emily's hand for attention. She scratched behind his ears, earning a contented sigh as the dog leaned against her leg. "See, we're buddies." Her smile was warm, reassuring. "1 week, James. Give yourself permission." 3 days later, James booked the cabin. As the reservation confirmation appeared on his screen, he felt equal parts excitement and anxiety. It had been so long since he'd been truly alone. Would old ghosts resurface without Max's steady presence? He pushed the thought away and focused instead on Emily's suggestions for hiking trails near the cabin. The days before his departure passed in a flurry of preparation. Emily helped him pack, insisting he bring his neglected fishing gear and the stack of novels that had been gathering dust on his bedside table. They established a detailed schedule for Max: morning walks, feeding times, evening routines, though Emily knew them all by heart already. The hardest part was saying goodbye. Max watched with confused eyes as James loaded his suitcase into the car early Monday morning. "Just for a week, buddy," James promised, kneeling to embrace the German shepherd. Max whined softly, pressing against him. "Emily will take good care of you. Be good for her." Emily stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand. "We'll be fine," she assured him. "I've got all your emergency numbers, the vet's information, everything. Now go before traffic gets bad." The drive to the mountains took just over 3 hours, a journey through rolling Virginia countryside that gradually gave way to steeper terrain and denser forests. With each mile, James felt layers of tension beginning to loosen. By the time he arrived at the cabin, the knot that had lived between his shoulder blades for months had begun to unwind. The cabin was exactly as pictured, rustic but clean, with a stone fireplace and a porch overlooking the lake below. James spent that first day simply breathing, sitting on the porch with a book open but unread in his lap, watching sunlight dance on water. That night he slept more deeply than he had in years. Each day followed a simple rhythm. Mornings spent hiking nearby trails, afternoons reading or fishing, evenings by the fireplace with a glass of bourbon. Emily texted daily updates about Max, often including photos of their walks or the German shepherd sprawled contentedly on James's bed. By Thursday, James felt like a different person. rested, centered, reconnected with parts of himself long neglected. Friday evening, his phone chimed with Emily's call rather than the usual text. "Hey, Em, everything okay?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm so sorry, James. My brother was in a car accident in Richmond. Nothing life-threatening, but I need to get to the hospital tonight. I walked Max earlier and left him plenty of food, but I won't be able to come over this evening." "Don't worry about it," James assured her quickly. "Family comes first. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon anyway. Max will be fine for one night." After they hung up, James felt a flicker of unease. Max had never spent a night completely alone before, but the dog had seemed fine in Emily's photos, and it was just for one night. Tomorrow James would be home and everything would return to normal. He couldn't have been more wrong. James woke early Saturday morning, eager to return home. The vacation had restored him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but now he missed Max's familiar presence. He packed efficiently, tidied the cabin, and was on the road by 8 o'clock, the mountains receding in his rear-view mirror as he headed back toward Ridgewood Park. Traffic was light, allowing James to make good time. As he turned onto Cedar Lane just after 11, the familiar sight of his cottage with its blue shutters and wrap-around porch brought a smile to his face. He'd texted Emily that he was on his way, letting her know he'd check on Max first, then swing by the hospital later to see how her brother was doing. James pulled into the driveway, noticing immediately that something felt off. The front curtains were drawn. He always left them open so Max could look out the window. Unease prickled at the back of his neck as he retrieved his bag from the trunk. At the front door, he paused, listening. The house was utterly silent. No excited barking, no scrabbling of nails against hardwood. "Max," he called, pushing the door open. "Hey, buddy, I'm home." Nothing. The silence hung heavy and wrong in the air. James set down his bag, a knot forming in his stomach. "Max, where are you, boy?" He moved through the entryway, glancing into the kitchen. Max's food bowl was still half full, his water barely touched. The unease crystallized into alarm as James headed toward the living room, calling out more urgently. That's when he saw it. Dark, rust-colored spatters on the cream-colored wall beside the living room door. His breath caught in his throat. Blood, unmistakable even in the dim light filtering through the drawn curtains. "Max!" His voice broke as panic surged through him. Military training kicked in as he scanned for threats, moving swiftly but cautiously through the first floor. Empty. Then a soft whimper from upstairs caught his attention. James took the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering against his ribs. "Max, where are you, boy?" Another whimper from his bedroom. James pushed the door open slowly and found Max huddled in the far corner, between the bed and the wall. The German shepherd was trembling, ears flattened against his head, eyes wide with residual fear. "Oh, God, Max!" James dropped to his knees, relief washing over him at finding his dog alive. "It's okay, buddy. I'm here now." Max didn't bound forward as usual. Instead, he crawled toward James, belly low to the ground, whining softly. When he finally reached James, the professor noticed a dark stain on the dog's right side. "You're hurt," James whispered, gently parting the fur to reveal a 3-inch gash along Max's ribs. It had mostly stopped bleeding, but looked angry and painful. "Who did this to you?" With trembling hands, James pulled out his phone to call Emily, then remembered she was at the hospital with her brother. Instead, he dialed the police, voice steady despite his racing heart. "I need to report a break-in and an injured animal," he told the dispatcher. "My dog has been stabbed." While waiting for the police, James coaxed Max downstairs and into the kitchen where the light was better. The wound didn't appear life-threatening, but he wanted Emily to examine it as soon as possible. As he gently cleaned around the injury with a damp cloth, he became aware of the state of his home. The living room had been ransacked. Books pulled from shelves, cushions slashed open, drawers emptied onto the floor. His office was worse. Paper scattered everywhere, his desk upended, the glass cabinet where he kept his modest collection of Civil War artifacts shattered. Blood smeared the doorframe and spattered across one wall in a pattern that suggested arterial spray. Max had clearly fought fiercely against whoever had invaded their home. Officer Sarah Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, followed by her partner. James had known Sarah since she was a rookie. Ridgewood Park was small enough that most residents recognized their local police officers. Her expression was grim as she surveyed the damage. "Professor Wilson, I'm so sorry." She knelt briefly to acknowledge Max, who remained pressed against James's leg. "Can you walk me through what you found?" As James recounted arriving home to find the house ransacked and Max injured, his initial shock began to give way to anger. Who would break into his home? What were they looking for? And how dare they hurt Max? "Nothing obvious seems to be missing," he concluded, gesturing around the chaos. "My laptop's still here, the TV, even the little cash I keep in my desk drawer. It's like they were looking for something specific." Officer Martinez nodded, making notes. "Any idea what that might be?" James shook his head, absently stroking Max's fur. "I teach history. I've got some Civil War artifacts, but nothing particularly valuable. Most of my research materials are digital copies or available at the college library." While her partner began taking photos of the damage, Martinez examined the blood patterns more closely. "Your dog put up quite a fight," she observed. "This looks like someone got hurt, badly. We should check local hospitals for anyone coming in with dog bite wounds." James's phone rang. "Emily," he excused himself to answer. "James, is everything okay? I just got your message." Emily's voice was tight with concern. "There's been a break-in," he said quietly, moving to the kitchen where Max had retreated under the table. "Max is hurt, Emily. Someone stabbed him." Her sharp intake of breath was audible. "How bad?" "A gash on his side, maybe 3 inches long. It's not bleeding much now, but—" "I'm on my way," she interrupted. "Keep it clean. Don't let him lick it. I'll bring my kit." The line went dead before he could respond. When James returned to the living room, Martinez was examining the front door. "No signs of forced entry," she noted. "Either they had a key or the door was unlocked." James frowned. "Emily has a spare key, but she would have locked up when she left last night." A cold realization washed over him. They must have been watching the house. They knew I was away and that Max would be alone last night. Martinez nodded grimly. "Possibly, or it could have been opportunistic. They noticed no lights on, tried the door, and got lucky." She glanced toward the kitchen where Max remained hidden. "Not that lucky, though. Your dog probably saved whatever they were after." James thought of Max, alone, terrified, fighting off intruders, then hiding upstairs, wounded and frightened for hours. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. If he hadn't gone on vacation, if he had come home last night instead of this morning. Officer Martinez seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't blame yourself, Professor. You couldn't have known." She closed her notebook. "We'll need a full statement, and we'll check hospitals for anyone with suspicious injuries. For now, make a list of anything that might be missing once you've had a chance to really look around." A car door slammed outside, and moments later Emily burst through the front door, medical bag in hand. Her eyes widened at the destruction, then immediately sought out James. "Where is he?" "Kitchen," James answered, leading her to where Max still huddled beneath the table. Emily dropped to her knees, speaking softly to the German shepherd. Max whined, but didn't move away as she gently examined the wound on his side. After a thorough inspection, she looked up at James, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "It's not as deep as I feared," she said, "but he'll need stitches, and I'm worried about infection. We should get him to the clinic." As they prepared to leave, Officer Martinez approached with a strange expression. "Professor Wilson, does the name Tyler Reynolds mean anything to you?" James frowned, searching his memory. Tyler Reynolds. He was a student a few years back. Why? "We found this under your desk." She held up a student ID card in an evidence bag. The photo showed a young man with dark hair and a sullen expression. "Looks like your intruder might have dropped it during the struggle." James stared at the familiar face, confusion turning to stunned recognition. "Tyler Reynolds," he repeated. "I failed him for plagiarism in his senior year. He threatened me at the time, but that was 4 years ago. I haven't seen him since." Emily's veterinary clinic was quiet on Saturday afternoon, allowing her to focus entirely on Max. James paced the small exam room while she worked, administering a local anesthetic before cleaning and stitching the wound. Max lay uncharacteristically still on the table, his eyes following James's movements as if afraid to let him out of sight again. "He's going to be okay, Emily," assured James, her hand steady as she placed the final suture. "The knife missed anything vital. He's lucky. And brave." "Braver than I deserve," James muttered, guilt gnawing at him. "I never should have left him." Emily straightened, fixing James with a stern look. "Stop that right now. This isn't your fault. It's the fault of whoever broke into your home and attacked your dog." She began wrapping a protective bandage around Max's torso. "And from what Officer Martinez said, they paid a price for it." The mention of the police brought James's thoughts back to the student ID. Tyler Reynolds. The name conjured an image of a sullen young man who had sat in the back of his American History Survey course 4 years earlier. James remembered the plagiarism incident clearly, an essay on Lincoln's cabinet that had been lifted almost verbatim from an obscure journal. When confronted, Tyler had been defiant, then threatening, claiming his father's connections would ruin James's career. Nothing had come of those threats, and James had assumed the young man had moved on with his life. Clearly, he had not. "We're done here," Emily announced, helping Max down from the examination table. The German shepherd moved stiffly but seemed relieved to be back on solid ground. "He'll need antibiotics twice daily and limited activity for at least a week. Those stitches come out in 10 days. "Thanks, Em." James knelt to Max's level, scratching behind his ears. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Max's ears flattened at the word home, and he pressed against James's leg. Emily noticed the reaction. "James, maybe you shouldn't go back to the cottage tonight. Max is traumatized, and honestly, you don't look much better." She hesitated, then added, "Stay at my place. I've got plenty of room, and it would be good for me to keep an eye on Max anyway." Under normal circumstances, James might have declined. He valued his independence, his ability to handle problems on his own, but looking at Max's anxious expression, feeling his own exhaustion and lingering shock, he nodded. "That would be good, thank you." They stopped by the cottage only long enough for James to pack essentials for himself and Max. The police had finished processing the scene, but yellow crime scene tape still adorned his front door. Inside, the destruction seemed even worse in the afternoon light. Bloodstains had dried to a rusty brown on the walls and floor. Max refused to enter the living room, cowering in the hallway until James finished gathering their things. Emily's home was a peaceful contrast, a craftsman bungalow on the edge of town with a large fenced yard and sun-filled rooms. She had a guest room that she quickly prepared for James, while Max settled uneasily on a dog bed in the living room, eyes fixed on the front door. That evening, after a quiet meal that neither of them ate much of, Emily's phone rang. It was Officer Martinez with an update. "They found someone matching Tyler Reynolds' description at Regional Memorial," Emily relayed, covering the phone's microphone. "Dog bites to the arm and hand, significant blood loss. He's claiming he was attacked by a stray." James felt a surge of vindication, followed quickly by concern. "Are they arresting him?" Emily asked the question and listened to the response, her expression growing troubled. "They're questioning him, but there's a complication. He didn't come in alone, His uncle brought him in. Richard Davis. Richard Davis? James repeated in disbelief. My neighbor, Richard Davis? Richard lived 2 doors down from James's cottage, a retired lawyer in his 60s who had made his disdain for Max clear from the day James had brought him home. There had been complaints about barking, about Max supposedly intimidating Richard's wife when she walked past the house, even an unfounded accusation that Max had killed one of the neighborhood cats. James had always been careful to keep Max leashed and well behaved, but nothing seemed to satisfy Richard's animosity. That can't be a coincidence, James muttered, sinking onto Emily's couch. Martina thinks so too, Emily agreed after ending the call. She's looking into the connection. In the meantime, they've stationed a patrol car near your cottage in case anyone returns. Sleep was elusive that night. James tossed and turned in Emily's guest room, his mind cycling through questions and theories. Around midnight he heard the soft click of nails on hardwood and felt the weight of Max climbing onto the bed beside him. Against normal rules, James didn't discourage him. They both needed the comfort of proximity. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Officer Martinez arrived at Emily's house with more questions about Tyler Reynolds and a request for Max's veterinary records to document the injury. James learned that Tyler had been released from the hospital into police custody for questioning, but was maintaining that he knew nothing about the break-in at James's cottage. His story is that he was attacked by a stray dog in Westside Park, Martinez explained, sipping the coffee Emily had provided. Conveniently, no witnesses. His Uncle Richard is corroborating, claiming Tyler called him after the attack. And you don't believe them? James asked. Martinez gave him a level look. The ID card puts him at your house, Professor, and the injuries are consistent with an attack by a trained dog, not a random stray. The problem is proving intent to break in without catching him in the act. By afternoon, news of the break-in had spread throughout Ridgewood Park. James's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and friends checking on him and Max. His department chair called to assure him he could take time off if needed. Through it all, Max remained unusually subdued, staying close to James and startling at unexpected sounds. Monday brought an unwelcome development. James and Emily had returned to the cottage to begin cleaning up the mess when a knock at the door revealed a somber-faced county official. "Are you James Wilson?" the man in the ill-fitting suit asked, consulting a clipboard. "I am," James confirmed, already feeling a sense of foreboding. "I'm Charles Pickering from Animal Control. We've received a complaint about a dangerous dog at this address." He handed James an official-looking document. "This is a formal notice that your German Shepherd is under investigation following a reported attack." James stared at the paper in disbelief. "Attack? My dog was defending my home from intruders. He was stabbed, for God's sake." Pickering remained impassive. "I understand your frustration, sir, but I'm required to follow up on all complaints. The report states that your dog inflicted severe injuries requiring hospitalization." "Let me guess," Emily interjected, stepping forward. "The complaint was filed by Richard Davis?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose that information," Pickering replied, though his slight hesitation confirmed their suspicion. "For now, the dog must remain leashed and muzzled in public at all times. There will be a hearing in 2 weeks to determine if further action is warranted." After the official left, James crumpled the notice in his fist. "This is insane. Max was the victim." Emily placed a calming hand on his arm. "We'll fight this, James. I have all of Max's records showing he's never had an aggressive incident, and we have police documentation of the break-in." Despite her reassurance, worry settled in James's chest like a stone. He knew how these cases sometimes went. The dog, regardless of circumstances, was often considered guilty until proven innocent. Word about the complaint spread quickly through their small community. By Wednesday, clear battle lines had been drawn. Many neighbors and colleagues rallied around James and Max, offering statements about the dog's gentle nature and good behavior. Others, particularly those in Richard Davis's social circle, began sharing stories of supposedly feeling threatened by Max on walks or hearing excessive barking at night. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled "Hero Dog or Hazard," featuring side-by-side photos of Max one showing him peacefully lying beside James at a department picnic, the other a stock image of a snarling German shepherd that looked nothing like him. The article quoted Richard Davis extensively about the inherent dangers of military-trained attack dogs in residential neighborhoods. "This is character assassination," Emily fumed, tossing the newspaper aside after reading it aloud to James during dinner at her house, where they had continued to stay. "And it's factually wrong. Max wasn't a military working dog. He was rescued from an abusive home." James nodded absently, his attention caught by a detail in the article he hadn't previously considered. "Emily, the article mentions Tyler is Richard's nephew on his wife's side. I never made that connection before." "That explains the bad blood," Emily mused. "Richard probably blamed you for Tyler's academic troubles. But to hold a grudge for 4 years, to the point of breaking into my home?" James shook his head in disbelief. "And what were they looking for? Nothing valuable was taken." The question nagged at James as they continued cleaning and repairing his cottage over the next several days. The police had released the crime scene, allowing them to finally address the damage properly. Emily enlisted friends to help repaint the blood-stained walls and replace the shattered glass cabinet. Max accompanied them but remained tense within the house, staying close to James and often retreating to the car when the memories seemed to overwhelm him. While sorting through the scattered contents of his office, James discovered something odd. His collection of Civil War letters, primary sources he used in his research, had been thoroughly rifled through. Several folders lay empty that he distinctly remembered being filled with correspondence between a Confederate officer and his wife. They were looking for something specific, he told Emily, showing her the empty folders. These letters were just family correspondence, nothing of monetary value, but they were organized chronologically, and now the letters from 1863 to 1865 are missing. Emily frowned, helping him gather scattered papers. Could they have academic value? Something a student might want to plagiarize? "I've referenced them in publications, but they weren't particularly revelatory." James tried to recall if he had mentioned the letters to Tyler during his course. Nothing specific came to mind, though he often discussed his research with interested students. As they continued sorting through the chaos, James found something he didn't recognize. A small leather-bound book that had fallen behind his desk. The journal was weathered, its pages yellowed with age. Inside the cover was an inscription: "Property of Captain William Ellsworth, 14th Virginia Infantry, 1865. "This isn't mine," James said slowly, turning the fragile pages. "I've never seen this before." Emily looked over his shoulder. "Could it have been mixed in with your papers somehow?" "No, I would have remembered this." James carefully examined the journal. The handwriting was cramped but legible, detailing the final months of the Civil War from a Confederate officer's perspective. As he skimmed the entries, one passage caught his eye. "April 9, 1865, Lee has surrendered. All is lost. I have secured the documents as ordered and will conceal them as discussed. Should the Yankees discover their contents, all our sacrifices will have been for naught. God willing, the cause shall rise again." James felt a chill. The date was significant. The day of Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, just 60 miles from where Ridgewood Park now stood. "This could be important historically," he murmured, turning the page. A small slip of paper fell out, not aged like the journal, but modern, a photocopy of what appeared to be a map with handwritten notations. In the corner was a familiar name: Tyler Reynolds. "I think we just found what they were looking for," James said, holding up the paper, "and I think I know why." The next day, James met with Professor Robert Gardner, his colleague from the archaeology department. Robert examined the journal with expert hands, his expression growing increasingly animated as he turned the pages. "If this is authentic, and I believe it is, it's quite a find," Robert confirmed. "Captain Ellsworth was rumored to be part of a group tasked with hiding Confederate Treasury funds during the final days of the war. Several $1 million in gold simply vanished from the Richmond treasury before the city fell." James nodded, the pieces falling into place. "And this journal might contain clues to its location. Tyler must have discovered references to it during his research for my class and traced it to those letters in my collection." "But how did the journal end up in your office?" Emily asked. "I think Tyler planted it there during the break-in," James theorized. "He was searching for the letters, found them, but dropped the journal during the struggle with Max. Richard must have put him up to it. Tyler wouldn't have the resources to research this on his own." Robert carefully returned the journal to the protective sleeve James had placed it in. "You should notify the Historical Society and the police. If there's any truth to the treasure story, it belongs in a museum, not in private hands." Before James could respond, his phone rang. Officer Martinez. Her news was troubling. Tyler Reynolds had been released on bail, with his Uncle Richard providing the funds. The police had obtained a warrant to search Richard's home based on the connection to Tyler and the break-in, but had found nothing conclusive. "We did discover something interesting, though," Martinez added. "Davis has been in contact with several private collectors who specialize in Civil War artifacts. He's deeply in debt, Professor. Medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment last year, plus a failed investment. He's underwater on his mortgage. He's desperate for money," James concluded, "and he thinks he's found a way to get it." That evening, as James and Emily were preparing dinner at her house, Max suddenly lifted his head from his bed and growled a low, warning sound James hadn't heard since the early days after his rescue. "What is it, boy?" James asked, moving to the window. A car was parked across the street, engine running, headlights off. In the dim glow of the streetlight, James could make out two figures in the front seat, watching the house. As he stared, the car pulled away slowly, disappearing around the corner. "We need better security," Emily said quietly, standing beside him at the window. "For both our houses." James nodded, placing a protective hand on Max's head. The German shepherd pressed against his leg, alert and ready despite his injury. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The following morning brought another development. Dean Robert Brown from the college called James, his tone grave. "James, I've received some disturbing allegations about your research practices," the dean began without preamble. "Richard Davis has filed a formal complaint claiming you've stolen historical artifacts that rightfully belong to his family." James closed his eyes, willing himself to remain calm. "Let me guess. He's claiming ownership of a Civil War journal?" "How did you know?" The dean sounded surprised. "Because I found it in my office after the break-in," James explained. "Dean Brown, Richard Davis's nephew, broke into my home, injured my dog, and now they're trying to cover their tracks by accusing me of theft." There was a long pause on the line. "These are serious accusations on both sides, James. The board will need to investigate." "I understand," James replied. "I've already documented everything for the police, and I am happy to cooperate with any investigation the college deems necessary." After ending the call, James sat heavily on Emily's couch, Max immediately climbing up beside him in a rare breach of furniture rules that Emily tactfully ignored. "Richard's getting desperate," James told her, recounting the conversation. "He's trying to establish a claim to the journal before we can turn it over to authorities." Emily sat beside him, her shoulder touching his in silent support. "What's our next move?" "We get ahead of this," James decided, scratching Max behind the ears. "We take the journal to the Historical Society today, document everything, and let the experts determine its provenance and significance. What they didn't know was that Richard Davis had already set more dangerous plans in motion, plans that would put not just James's reputation, but his and Max's lives in jeopardy. The Ridgewood Historical Society occupied a stately Victorian mansion at the edge of town, its brick facade and white columns a testament to the area's prosperous past. James had visited often over the years, donating his time to help catalog Civil War artifacts and letters. Today, however, his purpose was far more urgent. Margaret Collins, the society's director and a former colleague from the college, greeted them in the main hall. Her eyebrows rose at the sight of Max accompanying them, but she made no comment. The German shepherd had been increasingly anxious when separated from James, and Emily had provided a note designating him as a service animal in recovery. Not entirely accurate, but close enough to the truth. "This is quite extraordinary, James," Margaret murmured as she examined the journal under the bright lights of the conservation room. She handled the fragile pages with gloved hands, her expression growing more animated with each entry she read. "If authentic, and I have every reason to believe it is, this journal could provide valuable insights into the final days of the Confederacy." "What about the map?" James asked, pointing to the photocopied slip they had found tucked between the pages. Margaret frowned, examining it closely. "This is obviously modern, but it appears to be based on a genuine period map of this county. These markings," she traced the faded lines and notations with her fingertip, "they could indicate a cache location. Civil War historians have speculated for years about Confederate gold hidden in this region during the retreat from Richmond." "So it could be valuable?" Emily asked. "Historically, undoubtedly," Margaret replied. "Monetarily, if it leads to actual Confederate Treasury gold, potentially worth millions." She looked up at James, her expression serious. "I understand now why this has caused such trouble. Discoveries like this attract all manner of attention, not all of it scholarly. The process of documenting and authenticating the journal took most of the day. Margaret photographed each page, recorded James's account of finding it, and began the paperwork to properly catalog it among the society's collections. She also made several calls to colleagues at the State Historical Commission and a curator at the Smithsonian, her excitement growing with each conversation. "They're sending a team next week," she told James and Emily as they prepared to leave. "The journal will remain in our vault until then. I've also notified state police about the potential historical significance, which should add another layer of protection to your police report." As they walked back to Emily's car, Max suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his throat. James followed the dog's gaze across the street, where a dark SUV was parked beneath a maple tree. Though he couldn't see the driver clearly through the tinted windows, the vehicle pulled away as soon as James looked in its direction. "We're being watched," he said quietly to Emily, placing a reassuring hand on Max's head. "Richard?" Emily asked, unlocking her car doors with a wary glance over her shoulder. "Or Tyler," James agreed, helping Max into the back seat. "Either way, I don't think they're giving up." That evening, Officer Martinez called with a troubling update. The police had executed another search warrant, this time for Tyler's apartment on the outskirts of town. They'd found something alarming. A bulletin board covered with photos of James's cottage, his daily schedule, and several shots of him walking Max on their usual routes. Some photos dated back months. "This wasn't an impulsive break-in," Martinez explained, her voice grim. "Reynolds has been stalking you, learning your habits, waiting for an opportunity." "What about the letters that were taken from my office?" James asked, pacing Emily's living room while she listened on speakerphone. "No sign of them yet, but we did find research materials about Confederate Treasury shipments and something else concerning. A gun was registered to Reynolds last month. It wasn't in his apartment." After the call ended, James sank onto the couch beside Emily, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. Max limped over from his bed and rested his chin on James's knee, sensing his distress. "You can't go back to your cottage," Emily said firmly, placing her hand over his. Not until they find Tyler and that gun. James nodded, absently stroking Max's head. I just don't understand the obsession. A failing grade 4 years ago doesn't explain this level of fixation. I don't think it's just about the grade anymore, Emily replied. If Richard really is in financial trouble and he believes this journal could lead to Confederate gold, she let the implication hang in the air between them. The next morning brought a new complication. James awoke to multiple text messages from colleagues and students about an article in the local paper. Richard Davis had gone public with his accusations, claiming the journal was a family heirloom stolen from his home during a renovation project the previous year. The article quoted him extensively about his shock and disappointment at discovering a respected professor had somehow acquired his property. This is outrageous, Emily fumed, reading the article over breakfast. He's trying to establish a claim to whatever might be found. James felt oddly calm, despite the public attack on his integrity. It won't work. The providence can be established by experts, and there's no way Richard could authenticate any connection to his family. But the damage to your reputation in the meantime is secondary to our safety, James interrupted, glancing at Max, who was watching them intently from his place beside the table. We need to focus on that first. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Max immediately stood at attention, positioning himself between Emily and the entrance. Though his stitches were healing well, he moved with a protective vigilance that had intensified since the break-in. Emily checked through the peephole, then relaxed. It's Sarah Martinez. The police officer's expression was grim as she entered. We've got another problem, she announced without preamble. Tyler Reynolds has filed for a restraining order against Max, claiming the dog attacked him unprovoked when he was visiting your property. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Visiting? James echoed incredulously. He broke into my home? We know that, Martinez assured him. But he's claiming he was there at your invitation to discuss an academic matter, and that Max attacked without warning or provocation. Emily's eyes narrowed. That's absurd. James was out of town. Which Reynolds says proves his point, that the dog is dangerous when the owner isn't present to control him. Martinez sighed heavily. Judge Harmon is hearing the case. He's not particularly animal-friendly. Had 3 Rottweilers put down last year after a similar complaint. James felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. The thought of losing Max over false accusations was unbearable. The German shepherd seemed to sense his distress, pressing against his leg with a soft whine. What can we do? Emily asked, her veterinary professionalism taking over in the face of James's shock. Bring all of Max's records to the hearing, training certificates, vet records, anything that establishes his good temperament, Martinez advised. I'll testify about the break-in evidence, but just be prepared. These hearings move quickly, and judges tend to err on the side of public safety. After Martinez left, James and Emily spent the day gathering documentation and preparing their case. The college's legal counsel offered assistance once James explained the situation, connecting him with an attorney who specialized in animal cases. By evening, they had assembled a comprehensive file documenting Max's history, from his rescue through his therapy certification and unblemished record in the community. We'll fight this, Emily assured James as they sat on her porch that evening watching the sun set over the ridge of mountains in the distance. Max lay at their feet, alert despite his apparent relaxation. And we'll win. James nodded, wanting to believe her. I just can't help feeling that we're missing something. Why go to these lengths over a journal that might not even lead anywhere? People have done worse for less, Emily reminded him, especially people in desperate financial straits. The courtroom the next morning was more crowded than James had expected. Word had spread about the hearing, drawing a mix of supporters and curious onlookers. Max, wearing a service vest Emily had procured and a soft muzzle as required by the court, remained steady beside James. though his ears tracked every movement in the unfamiliar space. Tyler Reynolds sat on the opposite side of the room, his arm in a sling, Uncle Richard beside him. Tyler's face bore faint bruising, though James suspected it had been exaggerated for the hearing. Their attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit, conferred with them in hushed tones. Judge Harmon, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown, called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. The proceedings moved swiftly, with Tyler presenting his version first, a fabricated tale of being invited to James's home to discuss historical research, only to be viciously attacked by an uncontrolled military attack dog. When James' attorney cross-examined him, however, cracks began to appear in the story. "Mr. Reynolds, can you produce any messages from Professor Wilson, inviting you to his home?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "It was a verbal invitation?" "I see. And when exactly did this conversation occur?" "After class one day last semester." The attorney consulted her notes. "Yet records show you haven't been enrolled in any of Professor Wilson's courses since 4 years ago, when you were disciplined for plagiarism. Is that correct?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Tyler's face flushed with anger. "I've audited some lectures. Do you have any witnesses who can corroborate this invitation? Any colleagues you told about this meeting beforehand?" The questions continued, methodically dismantling Tyler's story until Judge Harmon interrupted, his patience clearly waning. "Counselor, I get your point. Let's move on." When it was James's turn to present his case, he spoke calmly about Max's rescue, his temperament, and his training. Emily testified as both a veterinarian and friend about Max's gentle nature with children, other animals, and strangers. 3 neighbors appeared as character witnesses, describing Max as a perfect gentleman and the friendliest dog on the block. Officer Martinez's testimony proved most damning for Tyler, as she detailed the evidence from the break-in, the student ID found at the scene, the stalking photos in Tyler's apartment, and the missing letters from James's collection. "Your Honor," Martinez concluded, "based on the evidence, we believe Mr. Reynolds broke into Professor Wilson's home while he was away. The dog was defending the property, as is his natural instinct and legal right." Judge Harmon removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked down at Max, who sat quietly beside James's chair, eyes alert but calm. "Approach the bench, please," he instructed. James's heart pounded as he and Max moved forward, joined by the attorneys from both sides. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge addressed Tyler directly, "your case is thin at best, fraudulent at worst. I see no compelling evidence that this animal presents any danger to the community. If anything, he acted precisely as a well-trained dog should when confronted with an intruder." Relief washed over James, but the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "given the public nature of this dispute and the concerns raised, I'm ordering a formal assessment of the animal by a court-appointed behaviorist. Until that assessment is complete, the dog must remain muzzled in public and cannot be left unattended outside the home. Are these terms acceptable, Professor Wilson?" "Yes, Your Honor," James agreed quickly, willing to accept any conditions that kept Max with him. Tyler's face twisted with fury. "This is ridiculous. That dog nearly killed me." "Control your client," Judge Harmon warned Tyler's attorney sharply. "One more outburst and I'll hold him in contempt." The judge turned back to James. "The assessment will take place within 10 days. Court adjourned." As James and Emily left the courthouse with Max, a small crowd of supporters greeted them on the steps. James's colleagues from the history department, several students, and neighbors had come to show solidarity. The local newspaper reporter who had written the previous article approached, asking for a statement about the vindication of Max. Before James could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. Tyler Reynolds was pushing his way toward them, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Wilson," he shouted. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." 2 court officers moved quickly to intercept him, but not before he had approached within 10 feet of where James stood with Max. The German shepherd remained perfectly composed, neither growling nor showing any sign of aggression, despite the obvious threat. A point not lost on the observers, or the reporter furiously taking notes. Richard Davis appeared behind his nephew, grabbing his uninjured arm and pulling him away. "Enough, Tyler," he hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Not here." As they retreated to a black SUV parked across the street, the same vehicle James had spotted outside the Historical Society, James felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't just about a failed student's revenge, or even about a valuable historical artifact. The desperation in Tyler's eyes suggested something darker was driving this vendetta. Back at Emily's house, James received a call from Margaret Collins at the Historical Society. Her usual composed manner had given way to barely contained excitement. "James, the authentication team arrived early from the Smithsonian. They've confirmed the journal is genuine, and they've found something extraordinary." She paused, lowering her voice, though no one could possibly overhear. "There's a cipher in the journal entries, hidden messages about the Treasury shipment. And, James, they believe the location is somewhere on your property." "My property?" James repeated in confusion. "How is that possible?" "Your cottage sits on what was once the Ellsworth family farm," Margaret explained. "Captain Ellsworth returned there after the war. The historians believe he hid Confederate gold somewhere on or near the original homestead before Federal troops arrived." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Richard must have discovered this connection during his own research, perhaps through old property records or family stories. That would explain the obsessive focus on James's home, the break-in targeting specific historical documents, the desperate attempts to discredit James and claim ownership of the journal. "Who else knows about this?" James asked urgently. "Just the authentication team and me," Margaret assured him. "We wanted to inform you privately before proceeding with any formal announcements." After ending the call, James relayed the information to Emily and Officer Martinez, whom he contacted immediately. The police officer promised to increase patrols near both James's cottage and Emily's home. "I'll have a cruiser drive by every hour," Martinez assured him. "But, James, if they're desperate enough to break into your home once—" "They might do it again," James finished grimly, looking at Max, who lay on his bed, ears perked, as if following the conversation. "But this time, we'll be ready." That night, as a precaution, Emily activated the new security system she had installed after the break-in. James checked and rechecked the locks, drawing curtains and setting up a makeshift bed in the living room where he could see both front and back entrances. Max positioned himself near the front door, his posture making it clear he had appointed himself guardian of their temporary home. As James finally drifted toward sleep around midnight, his phone vibrated with a text message. Unknown number, but the content made his blood run cold. "You can't keep what's rightfully ours. One way or another, we'll get it. No dog can protect you forever." James showed the message to Emily, who immediately called Officer Martinez despite the late hour. The threat was documented, the number traced to a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store near Tyler's apartment. "We'll increase patrols," Martinez promised again. "But I'd feel better if you both stayed somewhere else tonight. A hotel, maybe, under a different name." Emily shook her head firmly. "We're not running. My security system is top of the line, and the whole neighborhood is on alert now." James agreed reluctantly, knowing that relocating in the middle of the night would only add stress to Max's already tenuous recovery. Instead, they fortified their position as best they could, moving furniture to block secondary entrances and keeping lights on throughout the house. Neither of them slept much that night, listening to every creak and rustle in the old house. Max remained vigilant at his post, occasionally making circuits of the rooms before returning to the front door. Dawn brought no relief, only the certainty that the confrontation was far from over. As the first light spilled through the windows, James watched Max rise and stretch carefully, mindful of his healing wound. The German shepherd's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "We'll get through this, boy," James promised softly. "Together." He couldn't have known then just how severely that promise would be tested. The antiseptic smell of the veterinary hospital burned James's nostrils as he paced the small waiting area. 4 hours since Max had been rushed into emergency surgery, and still no word from Dr. Thompson. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in a sickly pallor that only heightened the sense of dread permeating the room. Emily sat hunched in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her scrub still bearing dark stains from Max's blood. She hadn't spoken much since they had arrived, responding to James's questions with brief, hollow answers. The guilt that had been eating at her since her confession seemed to have multiplied tenfold in the wake of the second attack. Officer Martinez had left an hour ago after confirming that Tyler Reynolds was in custody. The knife used to attack Max had still been in his possession when they apprehended him half a mile from James's cottage. According to Martinez, Tyler had sustained multiple defensive bites during the struggle, his face and arms bearing the marks of Max's desperate attempt to protect his home and his owner. James stopped pacing long enough to glance at the clock on the wall. 3:47 a.m. The night's events played through his mind like a horror film he couldn't shut off. The creak of a floorboard that had awakened him, Max's low, warning growl from the foot of the bed, the shadowy figure in the doorway lunging forward with something glinting in his hand, the terrible sounds of the struggle, Max's sharp yelp of pain, his own desperate grappling with the intruder. If Martinez hadn't been conducting an extra patrol past Emily's house, if she hadn't heard the commotion and rushed in with her weapon drawn, James couldn't bear to complete the thought. "He has to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Emily. "He just has to be." Emily raised her head, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Dr. Thompson is the best surgeon in the county," she offered weakly. "If anyone can save him, Michael can." The double doors to the surgical area swung open, startling them both. Dr. Michael Thompson emerged, still wearing his blood-stained gown, surgical cap clutched in one hand. James tried to read the verdict in the older man's face, but exhaustion had rendered his expression inscrutable. "He's stable," Thompson announced without preamble, and James felt his knees go weak with relief. "The blade penetrated the pleural cavity and nicked the lung, but fortunately missed the major vessels. We've repaired the damage, reinflated the lung, and he's receiving blood and fluids." "He'll recover?" James asked, voice cracking with emotion. Dr. Thompson removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose where they had left deep indentations. "Barring complications, yes. But it was close, Professor Wilson, too close. Another half-inch deeper or to the left." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "When can I see him?" James asked. "He's in recovery now. Give us an hour to make sure he's responding well to the anesthesia. Then you can sit with him. He'll likely remain sedated through morning." As Dr. Thompson returned to the surgical area, the entrance door opened and Officer Martinez reappeared, looking even more disheveled than when she'd left. "Reynolds is talking," she said without greeting. "Trying to cut a deal by giving up Richard Davis. Claims the whole thing was Richard's idea, the break-in, the journal, everything." "What about the attack tonight?" James asked. "That was all Tyler, apparently. He was furious about the court hearing going against him, said he wanted to finish what he started with Max." Emily made a small, pained sound, and James felt a fresh wave of anger toward the man who had twice tried to harm his loyal companion. "What happens now?" he asked. "We executed a search warrant on Davis's home after arresting Tyler," Martinez explained, accepting the coffee Emily silently offered from the waiting room machine. "Found the missing letters from your office, Professor, along with maps of your property marked with potential excavation sites." "So it really was about the treasure," James murmured. "Apparently. But here's the twist. Richard wasn't home. According to his wife, he left suddenly yesterday evening, saying only that he had to take care of something. She seemed genuinely confused by the whole situation. James frowned. But if Richard wasn't the one who attacked us tonight— It was definitely Tyler, Martinez confirmed. We have him on your security footage, but Mrs. Davis mentioned something odd. She said Richard had been meeting regularly with someone about the project. A woman? Emily straightened in her chair. A woman? Who? She didn't know a name, just that Richard referred to her as the expert. Someone who apparently had specialized knowledge about historical artifacts and treasure recovery. Martinez's gaze shifted to Emily. Which brings me to why I came back. We need to ask you some more questions, Miss Parker. Me? Why? Martinez reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small tablet. A neighbor's security camera captured footage of someone entering Professor Wilson's home the night of the original break-in. Someone who wasn't Tyler Reynolds. She tapped the screen, bringing up a grainy but recognizable image. The timestamp is 8:27 p.m., shortly before we believe the break-in occurred. James leaned forward to look at the screen, then turned to Emily in confusion. The figure in the image was unmistakably her, key in hand, entering his front door. Emily. His voice held a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. The color drained from her face. I can explain, she whispered. Miss Parker, were you at Professor Wilson's residence on the night in question? Martinez asked, her tone professional but gentle. Yes. The admission seemed torn from her. Yes, I was there. James felt as though the floor had opened beneath him. But you told me you couldn't make it that night, that your brother had an accident. He did, Emily insisted, tears welling in her eyes. That part was true, but I went to check on Max first. I was only going to be a few minutes. Feed him, let him out briefly, then head to the hospital. What happened? James asked, his voice barely audible over the hammering of his heart. Emily's composure crumbled entirely, tears streaming freely down her face. I heard something when I was in the kitchen. Voices in the living room. I was sure someone had broken in. I was terrified, James. I froze. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Then I heard Max growling, and there was shouting, and I ran. I left him there to face them alone. The betrayal cut deep. Not that Emily had fled from danger, which was understandable, but that she had hidden it from him all this time, allowing Max to be painted as the aggressor while knowing the truth. Why didn't you tell me? James asked, withdrawing his hand from hers. Why didn't you tell the police? I was ashamed, she confessed, wiping at her tears. So ashamed of my cowardice. And then when I saw how badly Max was hurt and how traumatized he was, I couldn't bear to admit that I'd abandoned him, that I might have prevented it if I'd called for help immediately instead of running away. Her eyes pleaded for understanding. By the time I gathered my courage to come back, you had already returned home and discovered everything. Martinez watched the exchange with professional detachment that barely masked her own disappointment. Parker, we'll need your formal statement. This changes the timeline and circumstances of the original break-in significantly. Emily nodded miserably. I understand. I'll tell you everything. As Martinez stepped away to make a call, an uncomfortable silence fell between James and Emily. The betrayal hung in the air between them, a tangible presence. I'm so sorry, Emily whispered eventually. I've thought about telling you every day. Every time I saw Max flinch at sudden noises or watched you struggling to rebuild his confidence, the guilt has been eating me alive. James wanted to stay angry. Part of him felt he should, but the genuine remorse in her voice reached through his initial hurt. Fear makes us do things we regret, he said finally. I understand that better than most. Do you think you can ever forgive me? Before James could answer, Dr. Thompson returned. Professor, you can see Max now. He's beginning to wake up." The recovery room was dimly lit and quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Max lay on a padded table, an IV line in his foreleg, bandages wrapped around his torso. His eyes were half open, unfocused from anesthesia. When James approached, the German shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the table, once, twice, before falling still again. "Hey, buddy," James whispered, carefully stroking Max's head. "You did good. So good." Behind him, the door opened, and Emily entered hesitantly. "Is it okay if I—" James nodded, making space for her beside him. Whatever complicated feelings existed between them now, they could wait. Max needed them both. Emily approached slowly, tears still evident on her face. "I'm so sorry, Max," she murmured, gently touching his paw. "I should have been braver, like you." Max's eyes drifted toward her voice, recognition flickering in their depths. His tail moved again, a subtle acknowledgment of her presence. As James stood beside the operating table, watching Max's chest rise and fall with each hard-won breath, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that Max was alive, rage at those who had harmed him, and a profound sadness that their peaceful life had been so thoroughly shattered. The road to recovery would be long and uncertain, both physically for Max and emotionally for all of them. The German shepherd's loyalty had never wavered, not when faced with intruders or knives or pain. He had given everything to protect his home and his person. The contrast between that unwavering devotion and the human deception surrounding them was stark and humbling. "We'll get through this," James promised softly, his words meant for both Max and Emily. Outside the window, the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, illuminating the trees and rooftops of Ridgewood Park. A new day was beginning, bringing with it the promise of answers and, perhaps, eventual healing. But for now, in this quiet moment of reckoning, all that mattered was that Max was alive, and they were together to face whatever came next. Romatry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The hospital waiting room was eerily quiet at 3 a.m. James sat with his head in his hands, exhaustion and worry etched into every line of his face. Max had been in surgery for over 4 hours now, Dr. Michael Thompson working frantically to repair the damage from the second, more vicious knife wound. The memory of the attack played on endless loop in James's mind, the shadowy figure in his bedroom doorway, Mac's warning growl, the sudden chaotic struggle, and then the terrible yelp as the blade found its mark. Emily dozed fitfully in the chair beside him, her hand still loosely holding his despite her uneasy sleep. She had been the one to call 911, the one who had pressed towels against Max's bleeding side while James grappled with the intruder. If not for Officer Martinez's timely arrival on her patrol check, the outcome might have been far worse. The door to the surgical area swung open, and Dr. Thompson emerged, still wearing his blood-stained gown. James rose immediately, heart pounding. "He's stable," the veterinarian said, removing his surgical cap with a weary sigh. The blade penetrated deeply, nicked the lung, but missed the major vessels. "It was close, Professor Wilson. Too close." "But he'll recover?" James asked, feeling Emily squeeze his hand as she awoke beside him. "Barring complications, yes. He's a fighter, that one." Dr. Thompson's expression softened. "He'll need extensive recovery time. Weeks, not days. And the psychological trauma," he shook his head. "That's harder to quantify." James nodded, understanding too well how invisible wounds could linger long after physical ones had healed. "When can I see him?" "He's in recovery now. Give us an hour to make sure he's responding well to the anesthesia, then you can sit with him." As Dr. Thompson returned to the surgical area, Officer Martinez appeared at the waiting room entrance, her uniform rumpled from the long night. "Tyler Reynolds is in custody," she announced without preamble. We found him half a mile from your cottage with the knife still on him, multiple lacerations to his face and arms. Looks like Max got in a few good bites before going down." "And Richard?" Emily asked, fully awake now. Martinez's expression darkened. "That's where things get complicated. We executed a search warrant on his home after arresting Tyler. Found the missing letters from your office, Professor, along with detailed maps of your property marked with potential excavation sites." "So it really was about the gold," James murmured. "Apparently so. But here's the twist. Richard wasn't home. According to his wife, he left suddenly yesterday evening, saying only that he had to take care of something. She seemed genuinely confused by the whole situation." James frowned, trying to piece together the timeline. "So, if Richard wasn't the one who attacked us—" "It was definitely Tyler," Martinez confirmed. "We have him on your security footage, but there's something else." She hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing her face. "Mrs. Davis mentioned something strange. She said Richard had been meeting regularly with someone about the project." "A woman." Emily straightened in her chair. "A woman? Who?" "She didn't know a name, just that Richard referred to her as the expert, someone who apparently had specialized knowledge about historical artifacts and treasure recovery." Martinez's gaze fixed on Emily. "Which brings me to the reason I'm here now, Ms. Parker. We need to ask you some questions." "Me?" Emily's voice rose in surprise. "Why would you need to question me?" "A neighbor's security camera captured footage of someone entering Professor Wilson's home the night of the original break-in, someone who wasn't Tyler Reynolds." Martinez's expression remained professionally neutral. "The timestamp was approximately 8:27 p.m., shortly before we believe the break-in occurred." James turned to Emily, confusion written across his features. "Emily? What is she talking about?" Emily's face had drained of color. Her hand, still clasped in James's, had gone cold and clammy. "I can explain," she whispered, though she seemed to be speaking more to herself than to either of them. "Miss Parker, were you at Professor Wilson's residence on the night in question?" Martinez pressed, gently but firmly. "Yes." The admission seemed torn from her. "Yes, I was there." James felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath him. "But you told me you couldn't make it that night, that your brother had an accident." "Did," Emily insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "That part was true, but I went to check on Max first. I was only going to be a few minutes, feed him, let him out briefly, then head to the hospital." "What happened?" James asked, his voice barely audible. Emily's composure crumbled, tears streaming down her face now. "I heard something when I was in the kitchen, voices in the living room. I was sure someone had broken in. I was terrified, James. I froze." Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Then I heard Max growling, and there was shouting, and I ran. I left him there to face them alone." The betrayal cut deep. Not the fact that Emily had fled from danger, which was understandable, but that she had hidden it from him all this time, allowing Max to be painted as the aggressor while knowing the truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" James asked, withdrawing his hand from hers. "Why didn't you tell the police?" "I was ashamed," she confessed, wiping at her tears. "So ashamed of my cowardice. And then when I saw how badly Max was hurt, how traumatized he was, I couldn't bear to admit that I'd abandoned him, that I might have prevented it if I'd called for help immediately instead of running away." Her eyes pleaded for understanding. "By the time I gathered my courage to come back, you had already returned home and discovered everything." Martinez watched the exchange with a professional detachment that barely concealed her own disappointment. "Miss Parker, we'll need your formal statement. This changes the timeline and circumstances of the original break-in significantly." Emily nodded miserably. "I understand. I'll tell you everything." As Martinez stepped away to make a call, an uncomfortable silence fell between James and Emily. The betrayal of trust hung in the air between them, a tangible presence. "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered eventually. "Thought about telling you every day, every time I saw Max flinch at sudden noises or watched you struggling to rebuild his confidence. The guilt has been eating me alive." James wanted to stay angry. Part of him felt he should, but the genuine remorse in her voice reached through his initial hurt. "Fear makes us do things we regret," he said finally. "I understand that better than most. Do you think you can ever forgive me?" Before James could answer, Dr. Thompson returned to the waiting area. "Professor, you can see Max now. He's beginning to wake up." The recovery room was dimly lit and quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Max lay on a padded table, an IV line in his foreleg, bandages wrapped around his torso. His eyes were half open, unfocused from anesthesia. When James approached, the German shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the table, once, twice, before falling still again. "Hey, buddy," James whispered, carefully stroking Max's head. "You did good. So good." Behind him, the door opened, and Emily entered, hesitantly. "Is it okay if I—" James nodded, making space for her beside him. Whatever complicated feelings existed between them now, they could wait. Max needed them both. Emily approached slowly, tears still evident on her face. "I'm so sorry, Max," she murmured, gently touching his paw. "I should have been braver, like you." Max's eyes drifted toward her voice, recognition flickering in their depths. His tail moved again, a subtle acknowledgment of her presence. "No." Dr. Thompson checked the monitors, made a notation on Max's chart, and stepped back. "He's doing well, all things considered. The next few hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic." As morning light began to filter through the windows, Officer Martinez returned with new information. The neighbor whose security camera had captured Emily entering James's home had discovered additional footage, this time of two figures approaching the rear of the property shortly after Emily had fled. "We've enhanced the images," Martinez explained, showing them photos on her tablet. "Tyler Reynolds is clearly identifiable. The second figure appears to be female, though her face isn't visible." "Not Richard?" James asked in surprise. "Definitely not. The height and build are all wrong. We think this might be the expert Mrs. Davis mentioned." As they studied the grainy images, Emily suddenly gasped. "Wait, can you zoom in on that?" She pointed to something glinting at the woman's wrist. Martinez enlarged the section, revealing an unusual bracelet with a distinctive pendant. "I know that bracelet," Emily said slowly. "I've seen it before, many times." She looked up, her expression a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. "It belongs to Margaret Collins from the Historical Society." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. Margaret, the respected director who had authenticated the journal, who had access to all the historical records of the area, who had known exactly where the supposed treasure might be buried. "We need to review the security footage from the Historical Society," Martinez said immediately, already dialing her colleagues. "If Collins is involved with Reynolds and Davis, then the journal and authentication might have been part of their plan all along," James finished grimly. "A way to establish legitimate scholarly interest in the site before they could excavate it themselves." As Martina stepped away to coordinate with her team, Emily reached tentatively for James's hand. "Does this change anything between us?" James looked from her to Max, who had drifted back to sleep, his breathing deep and even now. The truth of Emily's initial cowardice still hurt, but her courage since then, staying by his side through the hearing, the threats, tonight's attack, spoke more loudly than one moment of fear. "We all make mistakes," he said quietly, allowing her to take his hand. "What matters is how we try to make them right afterward." Outside the recovery room window, dawn had fully broken, casting golden light across the small Virginia town. Somewhere in that light lay answers to the remaining questions about Margaret's involvement, about Richard's whereabouts, about what truly lay buried on James's property. But those answers could wait, for now, in this quiet moment of reckoning and forgiveness, the most important truth was already clear. Autumn painted the hills around Ridgewood Park in brilliant hues of crimson and gold, a stark contrast to the somber gray that had lingered over the small town throughout the summer months. 1 year had passed since the night of terror that had nearly cost Max's life. Now the German shepherd lay contentedly on the wide front porch of James's cottage, his watchful gaze tracking a pair of cardinals flitting between the oak trees that lined the property. The physical scars had healed well. A ridge of fur that grew slightly different along his side, the only visible reminder of his brush with death. The psychological wounds had taken longer. For months after the attack, Max had refused to enter certain rooms in the cottage, had startled at sudden movements, had woken James with his whimpering nightmares. But time, patience, and love had gradually worked their unique alchemy of healing. James emerged from the front door carrying 2 mugs of coffee, passing one to Emily as he settled into the rocking chair beside hers. "He's watching those cardinals again," he observed with a smile. "3rd morning in a row." "I think he's actually watching for Helen," Emily replied, nodding toward the road where James's mother could be seen walking briskly toward the cottage, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. Helen Wilson had arrived from Arizona within days of Max's second surgery, declaring she was tired of desert living anyway and promptly taking over the spare bedroom. Her no-nonsense presence had been a stabilizing force as the events of that fateful summer had unfolded into an increasingly complex web of deception and greed. "Morning, you two," Helen called, waving as she approached. Beside her trotted a smaller dog, a young border collie mix with one blue eye and one brown. "Daisy needed her walk, and I figured we'd come check on the patient." Max's tail thumped against the porch boards at their approach, though he maintained his dignified position rather than rushing to greet them as Daisy immediately bounded up the steps. "How's he doing today?" Helen asked, settling into the 3rd rocking chair that had become a permanent fixture on the expanded porch. "Dr. Thompson says he's officially cleared for regular activity," James reported. "No more restrictions." "Just in time for the ceremony tomorrow," Emily noted, reaching down to stroke Daisy's head as the younger dog settled at her feet. The community had organized a special recognition for Max at the town's annual Fall Festival, a small ceremony to honor his bravery and to celebrate his recovery. It would be a bittersweet occasion, marked by both the triumph of justice and the lingering shadows of betrayal. The investigation that had begun that night in the veterinary hospital had ultimately unraveled a conspiracy stretching back years. Margaret Collins had indeed been the mysterious expert working with Richard Davis and Tyler Reynolds. Police had discovered that she had methodically documented valuable historical artifacts in private collections throughout the region, targeting those that might have connections to hidden Confederate treasures. Richard, with his financial troubles mounting, had proven an eager accomplice when Margaret approached him after learning of his distant family connection to the Ellsworth property, now owned by James. The journal, contrary to their claims of its authenticity, had been a sophisticated forgery created by Margaret herself, designed to establish a legitimate historical interest in excavating James's property. What they hadn't anticipated was Max's protective instinct when they broke in searching for the original letters that might have revealed inconsistencies in their fabricated journal. "Have you heard anything about Richard's sentencing?" Helen asked, accepting a cup of coffee from James, who had gone inside to fetch one for her. "Next week," Emily replied. "His lawyer is still pushing for leniency based on his cooperation, but given that Tyler nearly killed Max—" She trailed off, the memory still too painful to articulate fully. The most shocking revelation had come from Margaret herself, who, once caught, had revealed that there was indeed a historical cachet buried on the property, not Confederate gold as they had claimed, but a collection of documents and personal effects hidden by Captain Ellsworth before federal troops arrived. The items, while historically significant, had modest monetary value, nothing that justified the violence and deception the conspirators had employed. "The Historical Society called again yesterday," James mentioned, changing the subject to lighter matters. "They want to include the cottage on next spring's Historical Homes tour, now that the restoration is complete." The renovation had been a labor of love throughout the past year. Rather than erasing the memories of what had happened, James had chosen to transform the space, honoring its history while creating something new. The living room, where Max had fought so bravely to protect their home, was now a bright, airy library lined with custom shelves. The spot where he had been attacked the second time now featured a bay window overlooking a small garden shrine with a stone dog statue standing guard. "You should do it," Helen encouraged. "This place deserves to be celebrated." "We're thinking about it," Emily said, her hand naturally finding James's. The subtle gold band on her ring finger caught the morning light. New enough that she still found herself admiring it when she thought no one was looking. Their relationship had evolved slowly in the aftermath of her confession. Trust, once broken, had needed careful reconstruction. But in those dark hours at the veterinary hospital, watching over Max together, something fundamental had shifted between them. Emily's work with the rescue organization that had brought Daisy into their lives had been part of her own redemption journey, a way of honoring Max's courage by helping other dogs find their forever homes. "Oh, before I forget," Helen said, reaching into her pocket, "this came for you yesterday while you were at the college." She handed James an official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the governor's office. James opened it curiously, his expression shifting from surprise to quiet satisfaction as he read the contents. "They've approved the full pardon for Max," he announced. "All records of the complaint against him expunged, the dangerous animal designation officially removed from his file. Though the county judge had dismissed the case months ago, bureaucracy had moved slowly in clearing Max's record completely. This final document closed that chapter permanently." At the sound of his name, Max lifted his head, his intelligent eyes fixing on James with that particular mixture of devotion and understanding that seemed almost supernatural in its depth. Emily often joked that Max understood English better than some of her human clients. "Hear that, buddy?" James said, leaning down to ruffle the fur behind Max's ears. "You're officially a hero now. Not that we needed a piece of paper to tell us that." The German shepherd's tail swept across the porch boards in a dignified acknowledgment. The sound of a car approaching drew their attention back to the road. Officer Martinez pulled into the driveway, stepping out in her civilian clothes. A rare sight in itself, as she typically remained in uniform even on her days off. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she called as she made her way up the walk, a folder tucked under her arm. "I thought you'd want to see this right away." James invited her onto the porch, offering coffee, which she gratefully accepted. "What brings you out here on your day off, Sarah?" "The final archaeological report came in from the state team," she explained, opening the folder on the small table between the rocking chairs. "They've completed the analysis of everything recovered from the site. The excavation had taken place under careful supervision 3 months earlier, once all the legal issues had been resolved. A team from the state university had methodically uncovered the cache hidden beneath what was now James's garden shed. A small metal box containing letters, a diary, photographs, and a few personal items belonging to Captain Ellsworth's family. "Nothing earth-shattering in terms of historical revelations," Martinez continued, "but they were able to confirm that the captain was involved in helping former slaves escape north in the immediate aftermath of the war. Some of the documents provide first-hand accounts that haven't been recorded elsewhere." James nodded, leafing through the photographs of the recovered items. "So, in a way, he was hiding something valuable, just not what Margaret and the others thought." "Exactly. The university wanted me to tell you they're preparing a special exhibition for next month. They'd like you and Max to attend the opening." As they discussed the details, Max suddenly rose from his spot, moving with purpose to the edge of the porch. His posture was alert but not tense, ears forward with interest rather than alarm. A young family was walking along the road, their small daughter pointing excitedly at the cottage. "Look, Mommy! That's the brave dog from my book." The local elementary school had incorporated Max's story into their character education program, creating a picture book about bravery and loyalty. James waved to the family, inviting them to come say hello if they wished. After a moment's hesitation, they made their way up the path. Max sat regally at the top of the porch steps, a perfect gentleman, as the little girl approached with awestruck eyes. "Can I pet him?" she asked James. "If you're gentle," James replied. "Max likes children." The German shepherd lowered his head slightly, allowing the child to stroke his fur with reverent fingers. "He's so brave," she whispered. "He's," James agreed, meeting Max's steady gaze with a depth of emotion that words could never fully express, "the bravest friend I've ever had." As the autumn sun climbed higher in the Virginia sky, casting long shadows across the restored cottage, James felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been harrowing, the cost nearly unbearable, but here in this moment, surrounded by the family he had found, the home they had reclaimed, and the loyal companion who had risked everything to protect it all, he knew with absolute certainty that they had emerged, not merely intact, but transformed. Max, as if reading his thoughts, turned from the admiring child to look back at James, his brown eyes communicating what words never could. Whatever adventures still awaited them, they would face them together. As we reach our golden years, we understand what truly matters in life. James and Max's story resonates with us because it speaks to the bonds that sustain us when everything else falters. Like Max, many of us bear scars, some visible, others hidden beneath the surface. We've known betrayal and disappointment. We've faced moments where our courage was tested and sometimes found wanting, but we've also experienced the profound healing that comes from forgiveness and second chances. The loyalty Max showed isn't just a dog's devotion. It's a reflection of the steadfast relationships that have carried us through our own darkest hours. Perhaps you, too, have weathered storms with a faithful companion, human or animal, by your side. Maybe you recognize in Emily's struggle for redemption your own journey toward making amends for past mistakes. And surely in James's willingness to rebuild rather than abandon what was broken, you see the resilience that has defined your generation. As autumn comes to Ridgewood Park and new beginnings emerge from painful endings, remember that our greatest legacy isn't what we accumulate, but the lives we touch and the love we give without reservation. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.